2024 AHEAD Program webinar. Here is the agenda for today. We will first give an introduction of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. Next, we will give a summary of the AHEAD program. We will then cover the application process and walk through the application and budget in a case study. Then we will pause to answer questions relating to application. Afterwards, we will talk about disbursement and compliance. And we'll wrap up with a final Q&A session. Before we dive in, I'll give a brief overview of our organization for those who are less familiar with the bank. The Federal Home Loan Bank system was chartered by Congress in 1932 during the Great Depression as a funding resource for home mortgage lenders. Today, lending institutions use federal home loan banks to finance housing and economic development in their communities. There are 11 federal home loan banks nationwide, and each operates as a private cooperative financial institution. We are a government-sponsored enterprise and are regulated by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA, which is the same regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. As previously mentioned, federal home loan banks are cooperatives, and the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is owned by our member institutions headquartered in our district of Arizona, California, and Nevada. Our members include commercial banks, savings institutions, credit unions, insurance companies, and non-depository community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. The mission of our bank is to provide our members with reliable access to low-cost liquidity, essential financial services and expertise, and resources for affordable housing and economic development. Most people in the community development space know the bank because of our Affordable Housing Program, or AHP, which I'll talk more about in a second. We are required by our regulator, the FHFA, to use 10% of our annual net income for AHP. The bank has a public service mission and offers a range of products and services to benefit its members and the communities they serve. The figure you see here demonstrates all the products and services we provide to our members to support their community and economic development needs. In the interest of time, I will just point out a few of these. First is our AHP General Fund and Nevada Targeted Fund. These are project-based grants for multifamily and owner-occupied affordable housing development projects in our district. Next is our AHP Set-Aside Program, also known as WISH, which are grants for down payment and closing cost assistance to low to moderate income first-time homebuyers. Our bank offers other discretionary programs like the Middle Income Down Payment Assistance Program and Empowering Black Home Ownership Program. Please visit our website to learn more about these programs. I will now give an overview of the AHEAD program. AHEAD stands for Access to Housing and Economic Assistance for Development. AHEAD grants provide funding for targeted economic development projects that benefit low to moderate income communities. AHEAD is flexible and can be used for a variety of different purposes, including piloting new interventions or expanding proven development models. As an economic development grant program, projects must lead to outcomes such as job creation, preservation, improved individual and family self-sufficiency, or upward economic mobility, for example. Since program inception in 2004, AHEAD has been funded annually and has awarded over $25 million to about 800 projects. For 2024, the bank's board of directors approved $4 million in funding. Grant requests per project can be up to $100,000. Note that we may not award the full amount requested. Last year, the average requested grant amount was $53,000, with awards ranging from $20,000 to $100,000. We typically don't award less than $25,000 unless specifically requested on the application. The AHEAD program is highly competitive. In 2023, we received over 300 eligible applications requesting nearly $26 million. And ultimately, we were able to fund 75 projects, or about a quarter of the applications. We expect this year to be similarly competitive. We have limited funds and award a diversity of projects, which we will discuss further. Now I'll talk about the program eligibility requirements. The project sponsor must be a nonprofit organization, local government agency, or tribal association. Projects must be located in Arizona, California, or Nevada. Grant funds must be fully used within 18 months of award date. Funds will be available for awarded projects starting in September 2024 and must be used in full by March 2026. We've heard some confusion on the two parties within the application materials. So to offer some clarity, sponsor or project sponsor refers to the nonprofit organization, local government agency, or tribal association that will ultimately use the AHEAD grant funds for their project. The sponsor proposes and implements the project. A sponsor must partner with a member. Member refers to the financial institution that is a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. These could be banks, credit unions, CDFIs. The member is the organization that submits the application and disperses the grant award from our bank to the sponsor. Both the sponsor and member are responsible for the project's completion and final grant reporting. If a sponsor does not have a member yet selected for their application, they can find one from the member directory on our website. For sponsors who have received an award in the past, they are eligible to apply again. AHEAD isn't intended as an ongoing operating grant program. However, past award recipients are encouraged to apply for a new project or expansion of a past successful project. There are 8 different AHEAD project types, and sponsors will self-select the best fit based on their project objectives and activities. I will provide a brief definition for each project type, along with an example of what we have funded in the past. Capacity building. Capacity building refers to projects that increase the internal staff and/or operating capacity of sponsors. In the past, we've supported projects that help an organization hire its first paid executive director, and other projects that provide staff with expert training so that they can offer better service delivery to clients. Entrepreneurial microenterprise is a project type that supports entrepreneurs, microenterprises, and small businesses. For example, AHEAD has supported projects that offer business planning for local minority and women entrepreneurs, or help with access to capital for micro and small businesses. Financial education are projects that provide financial capability and education to individuals and to communities. Examples include financial education workshops for immigrant communities or credit building programs for families preparing to buy a house. Housing initiative are projects that can support housing in a variety of ways, as long as the project doesn't directly fund affordable housing constructions and/or down payment and closing cost assistance. AHEAD is not allowed to be used for AHP-eligible housing projects or AHP-eligible down payment assistance. AHEAD couldn't be used to build affordable housing, but it could be used to fund a job training program at an affordable housing project. We've also supported research studies for the feasibility of alternative housing types, such as tiny homes and ADUs. Job training projects are projects that will lead to job creation or preservation, workforce development, and/or other job opportunities for clients. Some examples include construction training for formerly incarcerated people and workforce development opportunities for transition-aged youth. In the project featured on this slide, Honey Art Studio partnered with our member Community Vision Capital and Consulting to provide culturally based workshops in interior design, architecture, and fashion design. The project focused on mentorship, job training, career path exposure, and healthy recreation opportunities for youth and young adults in San Francisco's Fillmore neighborhood. Other economic development is for projects that don't fit into one of the other project type categories or exhibit characteristics that fit into multiple categories. An example would include an urban farm providing jobs, healthy foods, and environmental stewardship to local residents. Another example of other economic development category would be a local church providing employment and social services to their community. Social services refers to projects that provide social services to clients and the community with an economic development component included in the services. We've supported projects that provide life skills and professional development for domestic violence survivors and funding to support homelessness prevention programs. I want to emphasize that economic development must be the primary focus of any social services projects. Technical assistance is for projects that provide direct technical assistance to clients and external parties. An example would be a nonprofit providing BIPOC and minority-owned businesses access to loan products and direct technical assistance to rural farmers to formalize their businesses. As mentioned earlier, the AHEAD grant is flexible and can be used for a variety of purposes. The grant funds can be used in a lot of different ways, including paying for staff and consultants, training and program materials, research and market studies, and etc. Here is a list of representative examples of eligible project uses of funds. This list is not exhaustive, nor is it exclusive. Now let's review the 2024 program timeline at a high level. We will get into the application details in a moment. AHEAD has a one-time annual application period, which opened on May 1st. We have an application document submission process, which requires members to upload documents to the bank via a secure portal. The bank has to set up the secure portal for each application. So we're asking that members provide a setup request form no later than May 23rd. The application window will remain open until Monday, June 3rd. After the application window closes, we will then undergo a review period during the summer and announce the award winners in early September. AHEAD Grant Award winners will have until the end of December 2024 to request funds. But we encourage all requests to be sent to the bank no later than November to ensure enough time for disbursement. Members will have 30 days to disburse the funds to the sponsor. The sponsor should have access to the funds by the end of 2024, but could access the funds earlier if they work with the member to submit the disbursement request shortly after the September award announcement. The sponsor will have the 18-month grant period to implement their project, spend the funds in full, and submit compliance documents by the end of March 2026. Now I'll hand it over to Abigail to talk more about the application.
We're now going to review the AHEAD application process, including a case study on how to complete the AHEAD application and budget. This timeline will serve as the roadmap for the remainder of the presentation. Let's dive into the application process in more detail. Only bank members can apply. Interested project sponsors should be working with or partnering with members on their application. The application package must contain the following: an AHEAD application and budget, which are integrated into one Excel document, an IRS nonprofit status letter. For local government agencies and tribal associations, we would like to see founding documents or other documentation establishing the organization. And third, a management roster and board of directors roster for the project sponsor. Both rosters must be included and uploaded as a single document. If the project sponsor doesn't have a board of directors, then they should include a statement with the management roster stating this fact. Please note that if any of these documents aren't included in the application package, the application will be deemed ineligible. We receive a number of incomplete applications each year that are ineligible. Please take your time to submit a complete application package. To help with the application process, we put together an AHEAD application reference guide, which is a PDF document with detailed instructions on submitting, filling out, and completing the application. We won't review the guide during this webinar, but the guide is currently available on the AHEAD resources page next to the application. We call the integrated application and budget the e-form, which is in Excel format. E-form should be reviewed by both the member and the project sponsor. The e-form has two tabs, an application tab and an application budget tab. The top of the application has the application deadline details and contact information if there are any questions. We highly encourage members and sponsors to look at our website and to review the application guide, as they may answer your question. At the very top of the application is a progress bar that shows how much of the application has been completed. As seen here, the application is currently at 93%. As we move through this application, we will eventually get to 100% complete, which is the point where a sponsor should then submit to the member for review and upload. If an application isn't complete, the progress bar will not show 100%, and we will deem the application ineligible. We've also included an application form input field legend here at the top. which provide tips on how each field behaves based on the data input. An orange exclamation point means the field must be completed. A green check mark means the field has been completed correctly. A red X means the field has been filled out incorrectly or it is an invalid entry. And a grayed out field means the field isn't required. Note that some fields may appear grayed out at first, but as the application is filled out, it may become required. We've also included the application table of contents, which serves a few purposes. First, it provides an overview of the different application sections and includes hyperlinks that will move the user directly to that section. Second, it provides progress bars for each section, which work in the same way as the overall project bar, the top right works. The table of contents provides an at-a-glance view of which sections need to be completed and/or have data entry errors. First up is project information. We've instituted a 60-character limit for the project name, so take this into account. We use the project name for marketing purposes, so nonprofit sponsors should think strategically about the name and how it would sound if they win an award. The address should be for the location of the project and not the nonprofit sponsor, though they may be the same. Note that the state and county fields are drop-down menus. Both of these fields can simply be deleted if a user wants to start over. A state must be selected first before the county can be selected. In this case, California has been selected as the state, but the county has not been designated, even though it's a required field. So we'll complete that. If you want to change the state after a county has been selected, delete the county first before selecting a different state. Both of these fields can be deleted if you want to start over. Member institution. This section is self-explanatory and should be the member contact that is responsible for this AHEAD application. This will be the member we contact if we have any questions. Sponsor information. As with above, the sponsor contact should be the contact that is responsible for the AHEAD application and that we can reach out to if we have any questions. Here, you will select the type of organization, nonprofit, government agency, or tribal association. Under sponsor description, we ask the sponsor to describe their core mission, management structure, and accomplishments. The sponsor should focus on a clear, concise overview of its organization here. This is not the location to discuss the project, so keep this section high level. Note the character limit. If the answer is greater than 3,000 characters, the table of contents will display an error message. In this case study, we have an error message that says we are 57 characters over. So that is not an acceptable answer, and we need to delete part of the data entry. So when we click back out, we can see that the message has changed. We have a green check mark, and the answer is now correct. One trick on writing this section: to enter a paragraph, hit Alt-Enter, because hitting Enter by itself will move the cursor out of the field. So you can use this method to write multiple paragraphs in Excel. AHEAD grant. In this section, we ask about the grant request and the start and end date for the use of the AHEAD grant funds. Remember that AHEAD is an 18-month grant, so if you win an award, the funds must be fully spent within that time period. The start date cannot be earlier than September 1st, 2024. And the grant cannot cover expenses earlier than that date. HEAD can cover expenses as early as September, even if the dispersed award isn't received until later in the fall. HEAD is intended to be a disbursement program, not a reimbursement program, so we expect all project expenses to be no earlier than September of 2024. We also ask if the sponsor has received an HEAD award in previous years. If this question is answered yes, then this section below will allow for input. Please put the most recent awards first. Winning an award in past years does not exclude the sponsor or project from applying in the current year. Project summary is the next section where we ask the sponsor to describe the project that will use the HEAD funds. Keep this section brief. We are looking for clarity so that we fully understand the project. Also note the character limit. We want sponsors to describe how the project or program will work and how it will benefit low to moderate income communities. What goals will the project look to achieve, and what impacts and outcomes are expected if the project received an HEAD grant? This is also the section to clearly outline the individual and community economic benefits of receiving HEAD funds. Be as specific as possible about the project activities and beneficiaries. We are looking for innovative projects, so please also consider that when applying. For project type, the e-form will only allow one answer to be selected. Note that if other economic development is chosen as the project type, then the gray box below will become yellow, so you can briefly describe the type of economic development happening in your project. Underneath project types are a set of questions that are required of all projects and help us determine program eligibility. The HEAD program grant funds must benefit low to moderate wage earners, small businesses, the greater community, or low-income households, which is why we ask these questions. The first asks about job creation and preservation. Depending on the specifics of your project, this may be the number of staff supported by HEAD funds at your organization, or the clients that you support to obtain or maintain their employment. We will follow up on this number if awarded. For this example, we have 3 jobs that are going to be created or retained through the project. The next 4 questions help us determine eligibility for the program, and at least one of these questions must be answered yes to be eligible for an HEAD award. This last question asks about the AMI of people who receive services from the sponsor. AMI refers to area median income. AMI is available on HUD's website and should be used based on the main project location. The next set of questions correspond to the selected project type. We have a job training project. We will need to report how many individuals are currently participating in the job training program and how many unique individuals will participate in the job training program with the receipt of an HEAD award. This next section asks about targeted beneficiaries. Please select all that apply. If other at-risk populations is selected, then provide a brief description of who is being served with the project. Next is the targeted service area, which is also a drop-down list. If other is selected, then you'll briefly describe the service area. Peri-urban refers to the geographic location that exhibits both rural and urban characteristics, typically an area between town and country. A good example would be parts of Reno, which exhibit areas that quickly transition from urban to more rural. Project results is the next section where you will describe how the project will be measured or evaluated. We want the sponsor to clearly describe how they will measure results or successes for the project. In our experience reviewing applications, quantitative measures are easier to understand and to compare to at a later date, but it is ultimately up to the sponsor to determine their measurement and evaluation methods. If awarded an AHEAD grant, we will revisit this section. Other Federal Home Loan Bank San Francisco programs. This section is for informational purposes only. Please fill it out to the best of your ability. Project use of funds. As a reminder, the AHEAD funds must be fully used within 18 months of the date of award. So this section specifically asks whether the sponsor will be able to use the funds within this time frame. We will review the expected length of the project timeline, so please make sure the AHEAD funds can be used within 18 months. We then ask the sponsor to briefly describe how the AHEAD grant funds will actually be used during this time frame. Next is the member's involvement in the project. This is based on the relationship and involvement between the member and the sponsor. So please list whether the member is providing any type of financial or non-financial support to the project. Examples of non-financial involvement by the member could be sharing of financial education curriculum, volunteering staff time, or someone involved as a board member with the sponsor. These last two sections ask about other funding sources and organizations involved in the project. Fill both of these out to the best of your ability. These sections are for information only to help us evaluate the total scope of the project, so there is no right or wrong answer. Again, we are asking for both financial sources and non-financial sources, as in other organizations that are involved with the project. We only allow a few responses in this section of the application, so please choose the sources and organizations that are most involved in the project. Now that we've reviewed the application, let's take a look at the AHEAD budget tab. The budget workbook will automatically input the project name, sponsor name, and budget period at the top from the application. Note there is a link in the top right corner back to AHEAD application form that is visible at all times and can be clicked to go back to the application. The budget includes these brief instructions on filling out the two sections of the budget, the sources section and the uses section. These are also available in the reference guide. First, you're going to complete the total sources of funds. These are all the sources of funds for the project, including the AHEAD grant. If the AHEAD grant is the total budget, that is acceptable. Requested grant amount will be input automatically into the budget. In this example, the AHEAD grant is filled at $78,000, and the project is expecting an additional $25,000 in government grants, $60,000 in foundation grants, $17,000 in organizational income, and $10,000 described as a fee for their service. This gives us a total project budget of $190,000. These other line items here can be used for items that don't fit into one of the existing categories, but please include an item description. You'll then fill out whether these sources are anticipated or already committed. We understand the anticipated column is an estimate, so fill this out to the best of your ability. The second section is the uses of funds. This should be for all expenses expected for the project. Sponsors should carefully consider ahead funding for as few line items as possible, since backup documentation will be required for every line item. This makes it easier ultimately for the sponsor to track these expenses. In this example, the sponsor is requesting $78,000 in ahead, and we see they've allocated it to 4 different expense items. Since we're also asking for other sources, we'll need to allocate the full $190,000. So for example, if you look at salaries and wages, the budget is showing a total of $80,000 in expenses. Ahead will cover $36,000, and other sources will cover $44,000. And in the far right column, this should balance out to 0. Again, we leave space for other line items, for items that don't fit elsewhere in the budget. In this example, we have a line item for $50,000 with no description. So I will correct that now to meals for clients. Fill out the ahead requested column for the exact expenses you expect to use the ahead funds on. And then fill out the other sources. There's no need to break out the committed and anticipated sources in this section. Program expenses should be for expenses specific to the project or program. An example would be curriculum and instructional supplies directly tied to a financial education program offered by the sponsor. Whereas overhead expenses should be for general expenses shared across different projects or programs managed by the sponsor. These are essentially indirect or administrative costs, such as rent, utilities, office supplies. We don't allow for administrative fees to the member, but if a nonprofit has a fiscal sponsor or is part of a larger national nonprofit that provides services, we could allow for that expense. There's no maximum, but we typically see 10 to 15% allocated to overhead or indirect costs. Now, we've intentionally not balanced this budget because we want to see the behavior of the form when there are errors, so we can help correct those errors together. But typically, we'd want to see in the excess deficiency only zeros, that everything balances. But assuming we think we've filled out this budget correctly, we would then navigate back to the application form and check this box at the bottom that says application budget has been fully completed. When we check the box, we get a red error message saying that the budget does not balance, and we need to go back and correct any errors. When we go back to the budget, all errors will be highlighted in red so that we can easily fix them. Errors are typically one of the following: either the must equal 0 on the right side should be 0, or there's an excess or deficiency at the bottom. So on the sources side, we can see the foundation grants has not been properly allocated between committed and anticipated sources. We've identified a total of 60,000 in foundation grants, but only have 45,000 in anticipated. So we have this $15,000 imbalance. If we enter 15,000 into committed, then the error message goes away and this part of the budget balances. Let's review the uses to see if there's an error message down there as well. And as we can see, there's no error message, so this budget is now complete. When we navigate back to the application, we can see a green check mark has now appeared on the form. Now let's go back to the top of the application and figure out why we're only at 97%. If we look at the table of contents, we can see that all sections are complete with a green check mark except for the project summary. If we click on the project summary, we can see that we have missed a section of the project impact here. So for this example, we're going to say that 10 part-time employees are currently going through the job training program. And with the AHEAD grant, we will be able to serve 15 more. This is now an acceptable answer. And we can see the green check marks. And the top of the application is at 100%. The application is now complete and ready for the project sponsor to submit to the member. Please don't forget to save your work as you make your way through the application. All applications and supporting documents must be submitted through the bank's secure portal, and only members have access to the portal at this time. It is imperative that members request a workspace by May 23rd so that the bank has enough time to set up the workspace and the member has enough time to upload the application before the deadline. We typically have a 2 to 3 day turnaround to grant access after a request. The sponsor will complete the AHEAD application package and route the documents to their member. All personal identifying information must be redacted from the application documents, including social security numbers, bank account numbers, personal addresses, phone numbers, and personal emails. We cannot accept documents into the portal with PII, and we do not have the capacity to redact this information for you. If PII is included, an application will be deemed ineligible. We often see retired board member home addresses, so please redact. The workspace will contain 3 folders for each of the application documents. Members can learn more about uploading documents in our reference guide, How to Upload AHEAD Documents, which is available on our website. Now I'm going to hand it over to Noelle to take us through some important dates.
Here are the important dates for the 2024 AHEAD program. We are currently accepting applications from our members through the secure portal. In order to submit an application, members must submit a secure portal setup request form. The form is available on our website and is linked on this slide. The deadline to request a workspace is Thursday, May 23rd. Portal requests must be emailed to aheadportal@fhlbsf.com. If this deadline is missed, you will not be able to submit an application for the 2024 program year. The application deadline is Monday, June 3rd at 5 p.m. Pacific. Application packages must be uploaded to the secure portal by the member. We ask members and sponsors to address any questions about the application prior to this deadline. We don't provide feedback on applications while the application window is open, but we can answer technical questions or questions about the application process. Now that we've gone over the application process, we will briefly review the final 2 pieces if a project is awarded an AHEAD grant. Here is the program timeline we saw earlier. Assuming a project is selected for an AHEAD grant, this is where we are in the process, the disbursement request period. As a reminder, the application round will close on June 3rd, and after we review the applications over the summer, we will make the award announcement in September. Those projects that have been selected for an award will move on to disbursement, and then we'll have until March 2026 to spend the grant funds. There are 3 key steps for the disbursement of an AHEAD grant. First is the announcement, which takes place in September. The AHEAD awards will be announced on the bank's public website and in an email to all applicants. We will also send out a separate email to each member and sponsor with a winning project with detailed instructions on how to access the grant funds. In the second step, the member will need to submit a disbursement request to us, which includes 3 documents: a program agreement, a certification and disbursement request, or CDR, and a disbursement budget. I will go over these more in a minute, but the important thing to note here is that the disbursement package must be submitted to the bank so that the bank can disperse the funds by December 31st, 2024. Otherwise, the grant funds will be lost. We encourage members to submit the documents no later than November to ensure that there is enough time for disbursement. Also, the sponsor should have access to the funds by the end of 2024, but could access the funds earlier if they work with the member to submit the disbursement request shortly after the September award announcement. The last step, after a complete disbursement package is submitted, is the bank will disperse the grant funds to the member. As mentioned earlier, we pass AHEAD grants through our members, so the funds will go from us to the member and then on to the sponsor. Once the member receives the grant funds, they have 30 days to disperse the funds to the sponsor. We leave it up to the member and the sponsor to work out the best way to disperse the funds after the bank has dispersed to the member. All of the documents must be submitted via the bank's secure portal. This portal is different from the portal at time of application, so the member will need to submit the secure portal request form again. This workspace will be the same one used for compliance. Now we will dive a little deeper into the 3 documents in the disbursement package. The first disbursement document is the program agreement. This is a 5-page document that is a contract between the bank, the member, and the sponsor. Because it is a contract, we recommend having your legal team review before signing. It must be signed by an authorized signer of the member institution and someone with the appropriate signing authority at the project sponsor organization. The program agreement is currently available on the bank's website, so please review that document prior to submitting an application. Please keep in mind that parties are agreeing to spending the funds according to the application and budget, fully expending AHEAD funds within 18 months and before compliance is due, and also notifying us in advance if there are any changes or delays. We've noticed some winning projects from the last few years that aren't using all of the AHEAD funds during the grant period and are then seeking extensions. While we understand some projects have legitimate delays, and we do have the ability to grant extensions on a case-by-case basis, we would prefer not to. Instead, we are asking members and sponsors to be more aware of the 18-month grant period and to make sure the AHEAD funds will be spent during that time frame. Sponsors that show a pattern of not using the funds within 18 months of award or waiting to request a modification or extension until compliance is due will be noted when reviewing any future applications. The CDR is a 1-page document which is only filled out by the member, in which the member certifies to the bank that all program requirements have been met. The CDR is available on the bank's website so feel free to review anytime. The disbursement budget explains how ahead funds will be used based on actual award and any other changes to the budget since the time of application. About 5 months will have passed between when you submit the application and when awards are announced, and we understand that some projects may experience minor changes to the budget in that time. If there are major changes in the project or budget between application and award, please let the bank know as soon as possible so we can discuss options. We won't go into detail about the disbursement budget today because we will provide more detailed instructions to projects that receive an award, and we can also provide direct technical assistance to members and sponsors on the disbursement process. Now that we've gone over the disbursement process, let's briefly review the final component of receiving an ahead grant: compliance. Here is the program timeline again. Assuming a project is selected for an ahead grant and the funds have been dispersed, the sponsor and member still have a compliance responsibility to report how the ahead funds were used and to keep track of project expenses. We have an 18-month compliance period, so for grants that win an award this year, the funds must be fully spent and compliance documents must be submitted no later than March 31st, 2026, which is 18 months from award date in September. A sponsor and member can submit compliance documents anytime during this 18-month period, so you don't have to wait until March of 2026 if the project ends earlier. In fact, we encourage submission of compliance documents as soon as the ahead funds have been fully spent and goals achieved. The compliance package must include the following documents, which we'll discuss briefly: the ahead project status report, ahead compliance budget, and backup documentation for use of ahead grant funds. The bank has simplified our program compliance process to streamline and reduce the time and effort required of both members and sponsors to submit the documentation. Some projects will be selected for an abbreviated compliance review. The bank will determine which projects are eligible for an abbreviated compliance review based on a number of factors, including the ahead application and the project sponsor's history with the ahead program. Please note that even if a project is selected for abbreviated compliance, we do reserve the right to request additional documentation. As with the rest of ahead, all documents must be submitted via the bank's secure portal, the same one used at time of disbursement. It's important to note that if compliance documentation requirements aren't met, we could deem a project as non-compliant. Non-compliance could include the following: not spending the entire ahead grant within 18 months, not delivering a complete compliance package within 18 months, including lack of backup documentation if relevant, any major changes to the scope of the project or budget without prior bank approval, or not curing any deficiencies within a reasonable timeframe. We take compliance very seriously and want all members and sponsors to know that non-compliance in past years may impact a member or sponsor from receiving an ahead award in this current year or in future years. The first piece of compliance is a final project status report, which certifies that program requirements have been met, and it must be signed by an authorized signer of the member institution and sponsor organization. It will also ask about the following: the final status of the project, including what was accomplished, and what impacts and outcomes were achieved compared to what was stated in the original application. All projects must submit a project status report. The project status report is due when the ahead funds have been fully spent and no later than 18 months after the award date. The project status report is currently available on the bank's website, so we encourage all members and sponsors to review the report to better understand the bank's expectations and to help with putting together the application. Those required to do full compliance will need to submit a compliance budget. The compliance budget explains how ahead funds were actually used, along with any other changes to the budget since time of disbursement. This is essentially the same as the disbursement budget, so we won't review it at this time, but it will look familiar. Those required to do full compliance will need to submit backup expense documentation. We will communicate full versus abbreviated compliance requirements after the grant is dispersed, so it's important for the sponsor to track and save documentation throughout the grant period in case the project is selected for full compliance. Backup documentation ties directly to the application and is required for the entire AHEAD grant amount. So each line item identified on the budget must have some type of acceptable backup documentation verifying the AHEAD grant funds were used for that purpose. A sponsor should carefully consider which types of expenses would be better to fund with AHEAD due to this backup documentation requirement versus perhaps another funding source. Sponsors should also consider AHEAD funding for as few line items as possible, since backup documentation will be required for every line item. This makes it easier for the sponsor to track these expenses. Here are a few examples of acceptable backup documentation for common AHEAD expenses. For salaries, wages, or benefits, a sponsor can use W-2s, pay stubs, or a detailed payroll report, redacted as needed. We don't want any PII included. For consultants or other professional services, we typically require paid invoices or copies of checks. For indirect or overhead expenses, we typically see a federal allocation report or a written explanation from the sponsor. Other expenses, please ask the bank about other uses not listed on the budget or discussed in this webinar. I'd like to emphasize the importance of backup documentation for compliance purposes. It is a requirement of receiving an AHEAD grant, and as a reminder, non-compliance may impact receiving an award this year or in future years.